Hi and welcome to my first 5 years Instagram Live, all about becoming a mathematician with Jennie and Alistair. And what's really good about today is we're in the same space, so we're actually in my first 5 years office as opposed to being in our own homes. We're going to talk to you all about maths today and just really sow some of the seeds about what you can do as a parent to support children when they are going on that mathematical journey. But as always, we've done you a nice PDF which you can download. You'll find the link to that in our bio, so if you go fill in your details, we'll send that to you. And that's going to expand on lots of the points that we're going to talk about today. But fundamentally, we're just going to give you some reassurance, I hope, around how children develop mathematically and make sure that there's plenty of joy around maths, because it is a joyful subject, even though as adults some of us didn't find it that joyful at school. Hopefully we'll kind of bust some of those myths as we go along.
I think one of the really good starting points, Alistair, might be what maths actually is in the early years, because I know when I was running a group of nurseries and you talk to parents about maths, they'd often think it started and ended with counting, and there was always that focus on counting to 10, counting to 20, and maths is so much more than that, especially in this early phase of a child's life. So maybe let's unpick, first of all, what is maths and mathematics in the early years?
Okay, so obviously unpicking that could take a little longer than we've got. We can do bits at the beginnings of it. We were having a really interesting discussion with a content team who write all of the content that goes behind our app about when did maths begin to feature within the app and in which of the 6 streams did it feature in. And actually what we know is that maths starts from birth. I mean, there's even been research done that shows that babies, very young babies, can seem to show they recognise the difference between larger groups and smaller groups. But maths often is linked to number and linked to counting, and again, as parents, that's a really good thing that we can think, well, I know what counting is, I know what numbers are. If my child can recognise numbers and count, I can kind of pin their attainment on that. But actually the number bit, the recognising and recording of numbers, comes a little bit later on, because maths is about language, it's about spatial awareness, it's about shape, it's about measure, it's about pattern, it's about counting. There are loads of things that underpin being a mathematician, and a lot of them aren't linked to number at all. So number is important, but it's one of many skills that we want children to develop.
Yeah, I think we typically in the nursery started to introduce really basic concepts of the language of maths. So we'd be talking about things that were big and things that were little, and really, you know, introducing stories and going on walks that point little things out and big things out, and rather than focusing straight in on the numbers.
Yeah, and I think children get hung up on numbers, and also things like being able to recite your numbers. So often your parents will say, oh, they can count to 10, or they can count to 20, or they can count to 100, or whatever it may be. But really, when you can just count, all you're doing is reciting it's like knowing the words to a song that you can sing, but not knowing the meaning behind the words. So you get lots of children who can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, but actually what they're not is demonstrating mathematical, well, language they are, but not an understanding of maths. Because what's more important is like, what is 2? How do you find 2? Can you show me 2?
I think we had loads of examples of that. So you'd have parents come in and say they were really thrilled because the child was counting to 100 even. And you can't even imagine what they've been doing to the child to get them to the point where they can count to 100, probably way before they should need to. But you'd say to the same child, oh, pass me 2 of those bricks. And the concept of 2 was something that they didn't understand, so it very much was about just reciting. So you always talk to me about the 2ness of 2 and the 3ness of 3, and the first time you said it to me I was like, what are you talking about? But actually it makes a lot of sense. So sort of explain to some of the parents that are tuned in about this idea of the 2ness of 2.
I think it's just giving children an awareness of an amount that's attached to a label. So the label is 2, and even that's not the important bit really. It's about the fact that I've got these 2 things that are tangible. So if I want to create groups of number, then those numbers have a verbal label and they have a written label. But the labels are the less important bit. It's the awareness of the groups that exist within. Because then as children get more mathematically developed, you could give them kind of 5 things, and they can see 5 as a group of 1 and 4, 2 and 3, 3 and 2, 5 and 0. So it's about them thinking about objects or groupings in a mathematical way, as opposed to just thinking, is this 2? So when we talk about the 3ness of 3 and the 4ness of 4, it's given children loads of examples to find, collect, sort, And they'll do that with their own toys, so whether it be soft toys they've got, farm toys, cars, dolls, whatever it may be, you'll see children who will group them, and not necessarily by colour or by size, sometimes just by collection. But that's children exploring that kind of two-ness of two and the three-ness of three. And the other way they do it a lot is through mark making. So you'll see loads of maths in children's drawings where there are collections of little things they draw, or even when they draw people or members of their family. That's all about categorising, counting, and kind of an awareness of number. But we don't need to say there are 4 people in our family, let's draw the number 4, you can trace over my dots. I think what we need to think as parents is we don't need to worry about that bit yet. The fact that we're exploring how many people are in our family and who are they and how many legs they've got altogether. And if we add the dog's legs onto the family's legs, how many legs is that? Let's count. It's celebrating that kind of language of mathematics, but also using it in a really fun way, and that's the important bit.
I think as well, what's funny when you listen to children count, they often sort of go 8, 9, 10, 12, 19, 20, and they miss loads of numbers out in the middle and maybe start in the wrong place. And the temptation, I think, as well as a parent, can sometimes be to step in and correct. Talk to us about that.
Well, my kind of view on that would be, when children are learning, you want them to have really positive moments in their learning. And if a child missays something or misrepresents something because of their level of understanding, if you then celebrate the achievement of them getting to wherever they want to get to as a moment, that's not going to concretely put in their head the mispronunciation of 12-teen. So what you do as a practitioner is think, that's great, you've gone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 12-teen, 23-teen, a billion, way! And everybody's like, yay, you know some massive numbers, that's great! And then you're thinking to yourself, okay, clearly, in their learning of the number sequence, their ability to recite a sequence, which is all counting is, I can do some more work with that in a practical, fun, play-based way where I reinforce the correct number sequence. What I'm not going to say is, you don't mean 12-teen, you mean 13. Or you don't mean that, you mean that in the moment, because that kills the enjoyment of the maths. It's just about thinking, okay, well, is it that important in this moment? Probably not. I can do loads of other really good stuff that will reinforce that and make them have a better understanding of what that is.
Yeah, I think we really want to encourage parents not to kill the moment and to really help children enjoy all of the success that they're having, and just clock it for later. Clock it that, we'll do a bit more work on that, but we'll, as you say, find fun ways. I mean, I used to, right from all my kids being babies, when I was carrying them upstairs to bed, I'd always count the steps. And not because I thought that they were, going to become mathematicians overnight. And like you say, all they were really doing there was learning words and repetition. But it all connects later, even if it's years later. It all connects.
And also there's a whole personal social element to that, and an emotional element that when, for example, being carried to bed, there's the kind of regular counting of the steps, the closeness of being held. So there's all sorts of associations that children make around how mathematical language just plays into their everyday life. But even things like, spatial awareness is a really important aspect of maths. So around children's own physicality, so how they are able to fit in spaces. So early spatial awareness for children might be, there's a gap or a chair, can I sit in it, can I fit in it? And again, chatting to the content team about some of the activities they put into the app. We were talking about one of our team's daughters who tried to sit in a doll's house because they wanted to sit on the doll's house furniture when they were very little, and literally just got in and wedged their bum into this doll's house. And at no point, if an adult had said, do you think you're going to fit in there? But they were kind of thinking about, well, I'd like to sit on that chair. It's a teeny tiny chair, and maybe if I stick my bum in, I can get to sit on it. And that's how you learn that, where you fit and where your body fits, your proprioception. But that then links into things like jigsaws, how children work on their awareness of kind of space, and then all the things you can do like capacity, so being in the bath, where you're looking at filling, emptying, full, empty, half full, measure. All of those things are really rich streams of mathematics, but they're nothing to do with numbers. And often they don't feel like maths, but they really are. They're really good stuff that's linked to maths.
I always thought there was loads of opportunities to introduce mathematical concepts without children knowing. So it's like by stealth.
Yeah.
When you go shopping and you've got your shopping list and you're looking for things and you're matching, you know, we could, for example, take some pictures of some fruits and give that to Olivia when we were going shopping, and we'd ask her to look out for those. And what she was doing when she saw them was matching. She was matching the colours and the shapes and the sizes.
But then you've also got this cauliflower is heavy and this cucumber is light, and how many tomatoes do we want? And apart from the fact that helps engage children on things that can be really boring like shopping trips, it's not necessarily when you go shopping all about money. Money will come later on their journey, but it's the whole experience of what can we fit in our basket. Is the basket light? Is the basket heavy? Is it big enough? Even pushing your trolley down the aisles. How many aisles do we go up and down? So that language around maths, positional language, is it on the top shelf, the bottom shelf? Can you get it for me? It's in between. Can we squeeze that in? So all sorts of really rich streams of learning, literally from a trip to Tesco's.
Yeah. And you know what, when you reframe what that trip's about, instead of the trip being something that you need to get finished and done so you can go and play, you can actually make the trip itself really good fun. And I didn't get this idea myself. I listened to someone do a whole story about the joy that you can have when you do your shopping. And when you reframe it into something that you're going to have some fun with, that there's some stealth learning going on, it's not a chore anymore. And I really reframe. I've got 3 children, 2 of them are older, and Olivia was sort of 10 years later. And I'd learned so much about all of this value of play and of grounding things in their interests that nearly everything we ended up doing became a joyous opportunity for learning rather than something to get done so that we could go to the park.
What's really interesting about shopping and money is that in this day and age, very few adults or children use money in shops. So whereas you would have your pennies and you'd count them out and how many pennies have I got, and obviously you still need to be aware of money when you're a child. But now it's like, how can I either hold my phone up to the barcode or just flash my card? So that's brought a whole other nuance to the teaching of money with children. But again, that's all just about amounts. Like how many 1 pennies do you get in a 2 penny and how many do you get in a 5 penny? That's all to do with the 5ness of 5 and the 2ness of 2, because how many of these make that? So it's all linked to those very early stages of maths.
So did you say earlier that shapes was also part of mathematics? Get my teeth in?
I know it's a different one to say, but yeah, shape, space and measure often comes together. So when your child is approaching coming to school, you might hear a lot of practitioners who will talk to you about the teaching of shape, space and measure. But the idea of the existence of 2D shapes and 3D shapes, but also thinking about pattern within the environment, so you can look for windows, doors, car wheels, bicycle wheels, where you make an discovering pattern really real and relevant to children, as opposed to sitting with some plastic shapes on the floor and just trying to learn your shapes.
We used to love those walks where we'd literally just pick a shape. You might pick a circle and say to Olivia, right, when we're going for this walk, let's see how many circles we can see and let's run up to them and point at them. And it's amazing how many circles there are in the environment, how many squares, how many rectangles. I always felt triangles was slightly more challenging, although they are all over the place. They're just not quite as plentiful. But you can do the same with numbers, and often children love like the numbers or the letters associated with them. So when Olivia was 3, that was her favourite number because she was 3. And I think it's again,
like with all learning that we talk about, it's making it personal. And I know there are lots and lots of activities in the app that will really support parents around the concepts. So we'll talk to you in the app about a particular concept that your child is beginning to develop, and then we'll give you lots of information that underpins that concept, and then some activity ideas around that you can help to try. Also, when you think about pattern, it's like also, it's that exciting. But there is things like repeated pattern. So you get to the point where children can recognise a simple repeated pattern where you might do red, green, red, green, red, green, and they're often called an A-B pattern because it's A followed by B followed by A. But then patterns become more complex, and there's lots of pattern work you can do with children where you might get A, B, B, then A, or A, B, C patterns, or even infinite patterns. So often when we're making patterns with children, we put it in a vertical line and we get children to move along the line. But if you put pattern in a circle, then the pattern just carries on and on and on. And then you can play games with children where you're putting something in the pattern that shouldn't be there. And again, it doesn't have to be felt-tipped whatevers or beads. This can be 2 apples, an orange and a tomato, if you've got enough apples, oranges and tomatoes, or socks, odd socks, socks that match, wherever it may be. Pants on the line, linking it to stories. That's another thing that we haven't talked about yet, is the amazing array of maths there is in everyday children's stories, from the obvious ones like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, to stories like, if you've come across it, like My House is a Squash and a Squeeze, which is all about how much, one of my favourites, how much you fit in a house, the house feels really full, and then you take everybody out of the house and the house feels really empty. But that's a lot to do again with positional language and capacity. So there's an awful lot of maths that children will absorb through story, where you don't have to teach it. We don't have to count every pair of legs that we see or every tree. That can happen in sharing a story with a child, but they will take in those mathematical concepts just because of the joy of the story.
And I think as well, clapping and nursery rhymes and singing songs, they're all opportunities.
Well, they are, and even if you're not counting your claps, if you're still doing, or even songs like Head, Shoulders, Knees and Toes, where you're taking named things in a sequence, or if you're happy and clap your hands, clap, clap, you don't have to say 1, 2, let's count them. Children are getting an awareness of a repeated number, so they will begin to subconsciously and consciously register that as 2, even though nobody said clap your hands twice, because there are 2 claps.
Yeah. And baking's a rich stream, cooking in general, serving up tea and talking about how many potatoes.
And remembering that early on, children will use non-standard measure. So there's standard measure, which is where, if you're looking at your jug or your scales, you'll have a number and they'll say 100 grams of. And for children who don't recognise number, so very, very little children, they won't use standard measures like that. It's fine for us to refer to them because we're referring to everyday number, but also doing things with children where they can make something using cups or spoons, so they're counting numbers of cups, and don't expect the cups to be full exactly to the right level. You've got to accept when you're baking with young children, it's just literally like Russian roulette. You get what you get at the end of it all.
It may be edible, it may not.
You may have to do that thing where you say, oh yes, I'll eat it later. Oh, it's delicious. But yeah, even making simple Play-Doh, so a really simple Play-Doh recipe you can make with children is 2 cups of flour, 1 cup of salt, and then you do 1 cup of water to start with, and you combine, and you sometimes then have to add another cup of water. But that's, with very young children, I have had them creating their own Play-Doh, and they get a real sense of satisfaction at the end. You will have to go through the too sticky because I put too much water in. Now I look like the abominable snowman because it was too dry and there's too much flour everywhere. But again, all of that is part of the learning process.
I had a mantra that the less we do for them, the more they learn.
It's true.
So whilst it's really tempting to do that Play-Doh yourself or to over-control how they measure, if we can just back off a bit and leave them to try these things themselves, and also to mix it themselves and get their hands in. There's so many other things that cross-fertilise the other topics we've been talking about, like the fine motor skills ready for writing. It all interconnects, doesn't it?
And when you lift your hands out the Play-Doh and you can't move them because they're all stuck together, and as a parent you're literally weeping thinking, why didn't I get some warm soapy water ready, or at least some wipes? But a child who's literally gluing their hands together is experiencing science, chemistry, physics, maths, cause and effect, problem solving. So in that kind of what can sometimes appear to a parent to be a bit of a disaster because the Play-Doh didn't work out and look like Play-Doh, the learning has been significantly greater because it didn't go the way you thought it was going to go.
Yeah, the learning from the mistakes thing.
Yes, celebrate the mistakes.
Absolutely. So one of the questions that we've got here, and I think it's quite telling actually, the question itself is, how do I keep the fire burning for a number-obsessed 4-year-old who won't be extended past 20 at school? So I guess what I get from that is the real focus there on the number thing, and possibly the focus on, can we count to 100, but do we know the twoness of 2?
Yeah.
So just sort of, how do you keep the fire burning?
Well, there's obviously more to that we would need to unpick around exactly what you've just said, Jenny. I think if a child loves numbers, because also when you are a child, when you're an adult, and you can do something and you get a really positive reaction from the adults who are in your world, that really confirms to you that, well, this is good, because when I count to 10 or 20 and all the adults go, oh, that's amazing, you can count to 20, that's amazing, then I'm going to think, oh, nice endorphin release, let's do lots of that. So there will be an element of this where you want that child to keep that positive association for them, which is very much to do with number. And so that is something as a parent you can do at home by saying, well, do you know what comes after 20, and talk about the progression of number. But again, you're just learning that naming sequence. But then there are loads of other things that you would do to find out, do they really have the context that goes around the two-ness of 2, the three-ness of 3? Do they understand that when you are counting, which is the unique thing about counting, that each number is one more than the number that's gone before? Which sounds quite obvious to us as adults, but children don't get that fact for ages because they just know their numbers. So
I think as well in the PDF we go to lengths actually to talk about much more than just number. So actually it's about your child becoming an accomplished mathematician and everything that means. So hopefully that mum as well might have a takeaway from this, that there's so much more, and that actually play, you know, at this very young age is the key to keeping the fire burning.
Yeah, and there are, even within number, I mean, there are ordinal numbers and cardinal numbers. So a cardinal number tells you the amount. So 3 is a cardinal number because it represents 3, back to the threeness of 3. But what 3 doesn't tell you is if you had 3 dinosaurs, it doesn't tell you which order the dinosaurs come in. That's your ordinal number. So the dinosaurs might be in colour order, height order, shape order, but just knowing there was 3 dinosaurs wouldn't tell you that fact. But also it's really interesting, another thing that's really interesting, when children count, they also need to learn that the last number they say, if they're counting a group or a set, indicates the total of the group. And again, that sounds really obvious to us as parents, but you will know if you've got children when they're counting. They sometimes do that thing called one-to-one correspondence, where you are looking at a row of objects and you put your finger on them and going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So often they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they haven't counted half the objects that are there because they're showing they haven't got the connection between what I'm doing here and counting. Or they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you'll say, how many have we got? And they'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. How many have we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And what they're clearly showing is they're not recognising that when I get to 5 and there aren't any more, that tells me there were 5. So the concept of cardinal numbers can be a big step for children, but it's a significant one. But what you can do, which makes a significant difference, is to get children, especially like counting into a pot or a bowl, then my brain automatically thinks about the fact that they're in a container. So it helps my brain to conceptualize they've all come together and there's nothing left outside the bowl. Whereas in the line, they're still left in the line. And the other thing we can do with all aspects of maths is rather than say, how many do you think we've got, or what do you think is there? Because that very much puts the onus on the child to get it right, and they feel that. If we say, I think there are 5, could you check them for me and see that I'm right? You immediately take all the responsibility from getting it wrong away from the child because they are checking on your behalf. And so even just that little bit of reframing how we pose a question to take the kind of responsibility or the weight of getting it right off the child relieves some of the anxiety around learning in general, but around maths.
And I think counting into something was a takeaway for me when I was listening to you many, many moons ago now. So we often used to count into a cup, and it could have been penne, it could have been rice, it could have been anything we were counting in, but it just meant that there was something that she was picking up and putting in, and I don't know, somehow it was more purposeful and it just helped it all stick a bit.
Well, when you are learning, whenever, I mean, we are all the same with an IKEA flat pack, I think, but when you can see it, hear it, say it, touch it, feel it, do it, then your brain is engaging on so many different levels. You're using old knowledge that you've previously got from the last disaster you had building a flat pack, and you're creating new knowledge with a new hinge that you haven't got a screwdriver like I never have, so you're just trying to manage with a butter knife, which is not to be advised. Always use a screwdriver. But the idea is that the more interactive you can be and the more senses you use, then the more your brain works. So for children who are learning, if we can touch it, physically move it, pick it up, put it down, talk about it, talk it out loud, all of those things mean different areas of our brains are working, which means we're likely to make more connections and have more concrete learning.
Do you know this love of learning as well? I think one of the questions that we had is how do we keep this love of maths alive when children start school? First of all, some schools are amazing. You know, they have really embraced play in the reception class and the year 1 class and the nursery. But unfortunately, there are still schools that send home maths worksheets with the children. And I know my daughter had maths worksheets from very young and very early on. And so how do we keep that fun? Because I'm thinking of the ladybird example that was often sent home where the ladybird had 2 dots on one side and 3 dots on the other side. How many dots do they have in total? really boring, but still something that she needed to do. Now, I know what I did, because I came and asked you how to make it fun. But, you know, what would you do about trying to maybe put that worksheet to one side? It still needs doing for school, but how do we figure out how many dots there are on the ladybird?
Well, this gives a really good opportunity to plug next week's live.
Does it?
Yeah, it's on Thursday, because we're going to talk next week about the importance of play and how play is a vehicle for learning. So play is not something you do before or after. You actually, right the way through school, so right the way through to year 6 and beyond, you can learn really successfully through play. And so what we're going to say is with the ladybirds, the concept that's being taught there is, you know, combining numbers together or compartmentalizing of numbers and then finding a sum. But if you can take the concept but make it relate to them in a way that is really fun, so either through basically making the tea or getting things out of the toy box or going outside in the garden, because one of the things we haven't mentioned yet is if you walk out into your garden, your park, onto the street, there is maths coming out of your ears in terms of all the aspects of maths, not just counting, but pattern, shape, space, capacity, it's all there. So outside open spaces, you know, give you loads of opportunities to explore maths. But back to the ladybirds, it's just about making it fun, because all you want to know is if you've got 2 and you've got 3 and you put them together in the same space, how many have you got all together? Don't have to be counting spots on a ladybird. You can just do that with a myriad of other things.
I think we talked about the fact that if you were counting the spots on the worksheet, you're not really exciting your brain that much. Whereas if we can take, again, the pasta example and take the penne and put the 2 and put the 3 and pop them into the cup, there's just a lot more going on. And it just makes it more fun. And of course, later then we need to record that it was 5 on the school worksheet to send it back in. But at least we've had some fun doing the homework.
And again, you can have that discussion with your early years practitioner, whoever they are, about where you feel your child is up to. And also, you know, having been an early years practitioner for over 30 years now, I know that if parents come and say, look, when we get this worksheet home, actually what it makes my child feel is really negative, they don't like doing it, so they're not making positive associations with either school, homework or maths. Is there another way? I know as practitioners people are open to hearing that, because how we feel about ourselves as learners, whether that's to do with maths or anything else, is way more powerful than what we know. So if we don't want to do it, we're less likely to do it. So we need to make these really positive connections for our early years children with all aspects of learning, but particularly with maths. And one of the things Jennie and I were talking about earlier when we were setting up our Diva Light was the fact that loads of adults will say, oh, I'm rubbish at maths, or I always never get, oh, I hate maths. And I think we think about maths, certainly I do, as like secondary school level. When you're talking about, you know, logarithms and algebra and that kind of thing. Everybody is brilliant at conceptual maths. We're all really good at this, you know, all the things we're talking about, pattern, shape, space, measure. And I think we need to be careful about the language we use around maths, even secondary language that we're talking about. And we talk to children about how much fun maths is, because actually, honestly, I didn't enjoy maths later on in my learning journey, but early years maths is just a ball. There is so much genuine joy and excitement in mathematical concepts for the early years, and we need to really keep that alive for children.
Yeah, I think the getting outside thing, we've not explored that enough in some respects, because children love to be outside, and if you combine learning outside, it tends to be even more fun than inside. And I know one of the things that we used to do regularly was just any sort of container, especially around autumn time when you've got all sorts of interesting things you can go out and collect, and you're just collecting all these interesting things when you're out and about, bring them home, tip them out onto the floor, and actually just back off and see what they do. But often they begin to sort and categorise and count.
I think children genuinely enjoy the sorting aspect, even if it's you've got blocks and they'll sort their blocks and they'll sort their cars. They also often do things where they line everything up, and they're not always lined up in size order, but it's that internal dialogue they're having about ordering and making sense of the world around them that's also linked into maths. So yeah, little collecting bags. I mean, egg boxes that are compostable are brilliant because they've got little compartments in them. It's great for fine motor. But can you fit that in your egg box? That lovely big stick that you found? Well, if you can't, then what can we do with that? So being outside, spotting pattern, creating pattern, petals around a daisy, lying on your back, looking up through the trees and seeing what holes you can see around the leaves. looking at clouds, obviously not looking into the sun, but when we do that thing where we lie on our back and see shapes in clouds, all of that is linked to that early spatial awareness, it's linked to pattern, it's linked to maths. And what it is saying, oh, I can see a cow, I can see a dog, I can see a funny face. So again, loads of outdoor links to really good mathematical concepts.
Yeah, and it's great fun, even if you're just going collecting twigs and you get home later, you can, set some little challenges if they're up for it, where they're going from shortest to longest and sort of lining up the sticks, and when they step back, they seem so proud when they look at what they've done. And again, even if it's not quite right, we don't, get in there and correct, we just, yay, loving what you've done and clock it for later.
I think back to when my boys were little and the back of our car was literally like a skip, because it always had some random stick in it that they might have fought with elsewhere. That's a whole other live that we'll do. But yeah, loads of random stuff in it, but they got a lot of play out of that, the randomness of it.
Yeah.
And it is very much, just as Jennie was saying, the celebrating of, they might not always want to order them by length, but sometimes they do. And sometimes as an adult, that's your kind of tidy up game, or that's your life gets in the way. So there are things that you have to do as an adult to make the world function effectively. So sometimes you have to move something over there or tidy it up. But I have to say, and again, we'll talk about this next week in terms of play, the more, if you've got the space, the more you can leave out to allow children to visit, revisit and visit again, the richer you will see that play. And that links to things like mathematical concepts. So having a big collection of sticks that you have for a long period of time allows children to build with them, sort with them, try and stand them up, lean them against each other. And as an adult, you can interject with bits of, oh, I wonder what, or how about, or shall we? But the longer they've got them for, the more they can use them, the richer it gets. Absolutely.
Just another question here that I thought was interesting came in earlier. When to introduce symbols for numbers? And she's saying that her little one that's approaching 3 years old, no matter what the symbol is, will always say it's the number one.
Okay, which is not uncommon and not unusual. So again, we're thinking about when children are learning stuff to do with mathematics, the visual representation of a number name is one of the things that they need to learn. So there's the concept of number, and I go back to number again, so the concept of amount, let's say, so we're back to the threeness of 3. Then there's the fact that that amount is called 3, and then there's the fact that that symbol there means 3 to the kind of wider community. And all of those things are very separate.
Yeah.
The most important one being the concept of what makes 3. The least important one for a 3-year-old being that I need to be able to write and recognise the number 3. So you treat them in different ways, in that you want with your children to spot numbers in the environment, because you want them to realise, like when we talk about reading, like we did in our live, the fact that words carry meaning and symbols carry meaning. You want them to know that these things called numbers tell us things, and they're important and they're significant. When you are 3, when your house is number 46, that's significant.
Yeah.
The numbers that are on your car that you can never remember when somebody asks you what your registration is, all of that is significant. So you'd approach number recognition in that way, numbers that are significant to us, but not necessarily expect children to know that if I am, that's the number 3 because I am 3, but I can bring you 3. So think about them differently. And the fact that a child says always 1 just shows that they are at that part on their journey where they maybe have got a concrete concept of 1, and that's what's dead familiar. So anything in their head, when anybody says number, they go back to what they know, which is 1. And all you would do with that is think, yep, I'm not going to say no, it's not 1, it's 3. I am going to, in that moment, I am not going to correct you, because that's going to be a negative association you'll have with that. What I'm going to do is find loads of opportunities to look at other numbers, find them in the environment, and allow children to hear me referring to them in their correct capacity, but not in a look, you were wrong, this one, that's what a number 2 looks like. And they will, over time, assimilate that when it makes sense to them.
It comes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we'll just finish back with the younger children. So a question that's just popped up is early maths for a 3-month-old. Now I know we kind of touched on it, but just to come back away from numbers and counting and all that good stuff, right at the very beginning of the journey, what are the best things to do to start to, I mean, obviously we're not going to sit the 3-month-old down and say, right, we're doing maths now, But what's the fun stuff that we can just do day to day that's starting to get some of those concepts going?
So when you are 3 months old, maths is all about the world around you. So like we've talked about in this live, we need to think about things like spatial awareness, capacity, experience of things like heavy and light, so going to pick things up and put things down. These are very, very early stages of loads of reading stories. What we haven't talked about are things, the classic ones we've missed, like nursery rhymes. So of course on My First 5 Years YouTube channel, we've got some brilliant nursery rhymes where you've got the tune and the words, and then a little opportunity of the tune with no singing to allow parents to sing along there. And they've got obvious nursery rhymes like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then there are other ones that involve mathematical concepts without number. And at 3 months old, you're not going to be singing back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's the beginnings of. So for 3 months, I would say maths is literally in everything you do. And you're saying to them, do you want, when you're feeding, we're talking about spoonfuls, you know,
all gone.
Yeah,
Would you like any more?
Yeah, empty, juice, all that kind of stuff. So you are beginning to just fill their world with the language of maths. What we're not doing is saying, can you spot the triangles? Can you spot the circle?
Yeah.
But we're doing all that other good stuff around mathematical language and development.
So it's all really about talk and conversation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And experience, hands-on, touching, feeling, doing, and the adult very much leading.
Absolutely. We've got to becoming a talker coming soon.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when, but we'll put all those dates up. So it's probably time to begin to wrap up. We've got another live next week. We're going to try to do these every week because we're getting some really fabulous feedback. Next week's live is going to be about play and the importance of play and how play underpins absolutely everything. And that's on Thursday the 24th at 12:30. Don't forget you can download the PDF, so it's in the Insta bio, and you can download the app as well. So the app, you get 14 days free trial, so you can try it and have a good look and see what you think about it all. And there's an offer at the moment because obviously it's very new launch, so it's $1.99 for the first 3 months and then $9.99 thereafter. But everything we know, everything we've learned over 50 odd years is in that app, and lots of daily ideas about how you can introduce all these concepts. So there's daily activities and fun things that are dead easy to do, from things you'll have in your home and things you'll have outside. And you don't have to download the app. We've put lots of content as well on our social media sites. So we just want to make sure that everybody gets access to our passion about the early years and
That's
how to
plan.
help your children. That's the plan. Everybody in the world.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. It's been really good. See you next week, hopefully.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.